Hey yo everybody, long time no see. It is I, Necroxis. At least that is what the guy in my mirror says my name is. Anyway, today we're going to make a little channel history in terms of what we're covering. As those of you who might have watched my Lorthamar Taran video, and by the way, if you did, thank you, because it hit 1,000 views faster than any other video I've done thus far, then you would know that I'm going to cover a neutral character today. What you might not know is that I participate in lore conversations on MMO Champion quite a lot. And, you know, ignoring the fact that I may or may not be currently banned because I was stupid and participated in a political thread on the website, which is always a bad idea, I received a suggestion that piqued my interest. I'll explain my reasons why in the opinion section, but today we're going to take a look at not only a character, but the faction that that character leads as well. And that character is Taran Zhu and the Shado-Pan. There isn't exactly a wealth of information about Taran Zhu, so I decided to include a history about the entire organization as well. And at the end I'll explain why I believe not only does Taran Zhu have a very justified position in hating the Horde, and to a lesser extent the Alliance, but also why the Shado-Pan are not an organization that you want to screw with. So let's begin. The Shado-Pan are a secretive organization of Pandaren who act in the stereotypical ninja-like fashion and are dedicated to protecting Pandaria from various threats. Because the Pandaren do not have an actual standing army, it always falls onto the Shado-Pan to defend their homeland from everything between Mogu, Yangol, Mantid, and most specifically, the Shah. They are considered the most elite warriors of Pandaren society, and they are the only ones that, before the Alliance and Horde actually arrive, truly understands the threat of the Shah. The Shado-Pan Order was founded 10,000 years ago under a charter crafted by the last Pandaren Emperor, Xiaohao, just before the Sundering occurred. By now I'm sure most of you understand the origins of the Shah, but in case you didn't, here it is in a nutshell. The Shah were created when the Titans legit killed a seven-headed old god named Yasiraj. With his dying breath, Yasiraj cursed Pandaria with his shadow, eventually manifesting with the Shah. 10,000 years ago, Emperor Xiaohao, in an effort to understand how to prevent Pandaria from being affected by the upcoming Sundering, purged the six major Shah, which include doubt, despair, anger, hatred, guilt, and fear, from his own body. But he understood that the Shah would never be truly defeated. He knew that the Shah energies could, and probably would, bubble up on Pandaria from time to time. In many ways, the cause of this was Xiaohao himself, as we learn in patch 5.3. Xiaohao never purged the Shah of pride from himself, and it was his pride that ultimately cloaked Pandaria in mist, which in the end proved the impetus for the banished Shah to fester and gain strength over 10,000 years. As a result, Emperor Xiaohao established an order, the Shado-Pan, whose duty it was to restrain and control the Shah, in addition to defeating it whenever it corrupts the hearts of their people. Mere hours after Xiaohao purged the six major Shah from himself, did the first Shado-Pan bend a knee to him and speak an oath. This would later become a ritual. Every Shado-Pan initiate would speak the same words to the current lord of the Shado-Pan after they had passed their trial of the Red Blossoms. And thus the Shado-Pan entered into a timeless struggle with the shadowy creatures known as the Shah. Speaking on the trials, every Pandaren who wishes to join the Shado-Pan must undergo an ordeal by the name of the Trial of the Red Blossoms every 7 seasons, corresponding with the trees in the monastery turning red. The trial is notorious for being a gauntlet of pain and rigor that will kill most that undergo it. 3 months before the trials begin, applicants are selected by Shado-Pan agents across the continent as worthy candidates. Often teenagers are selected, but those as young as 11 have been chosen as well. These candidates are given a ring that allows them to pass by the monastery gates. Past these gates, the Master of the Omnia explains the trial consists of 3 phases: the test of resolve, the test of strength, and the test of spirit. It is also at this moment that the candidates are told that each task is potentially deadly, and they can change their minds and leave if they choose. The candidates are told that there is no dishonor in walking away, although they will never be given the chance to join again. Those that quit are escorted out of the monastery, and those that are left proceed with the trial. Now, the Shado-Pan's goal is generally the protection of Pandaria as a whole from various threats, and thus they are allied with the Golden Lotus, a faction charged with guarding the Veil of the Eternal Blossoms, and the August Celestials, which are the 4 great animal spirits of Pandaria. The Shado-Pan are currently divided into 3 disciplines, each with its own master. These 3 masters then report directly to the Lord of the Shado-Pan himself, who is the overall ruler. The current 3 disciplines of the Shado-Pan are 1. The Omnia. This discipline is led by Master Yalia Sage Whisper. Their charge consists of maintaining the knowledge, wisdom, and traditions of the Shado-Pan order, and as such, the majority in this discipline consists of priests and magi. 2. The Black Guard. This discipline is led by Master Juan Snowdrift. This group consists of the more warrior-type members. These members are required to test their mettle against their master in order to ensure maximum lethality. This group is also the one which actively guards the Serpent Spine Wall, and as such the majority of Shado-Pan in this discipline are either warriors or monks. Finally, the 3rd discipline are the Wukao. This discipline is led by Hawkmaster Nurong. They consist of the Shado-Pan scouts, hunters, spies, and assassins. Their goal is to bring death from the shadows and teach those that they are meant to fight that they should fear the night. And as such, the Shado-Pan in this discipline are primarily hunters and rogues. And finally, the current Lord of the Shado-Pan is a man by the name of Taran Zhu. He is first encountered by both the Horde and the Alliance when they first arrive in the Jade Forest. He watches the Horde and Alliance be welcomed by their respective Pandaren mayors into their villages, much to his chagrin. The Alliance then encounter an orc warlock named Gatrul, and the Horde encounter a Captain Doran, both of which are corrupted by the Shah, before Taran Zhu encounters them again. After the Horde and the Alliance deal with these 2 corrupted members appropriately, General Nazgrim leading the Horde, and Rel Nightwind, after watching a command from Sky Admiral Rogers to kill Horde soldiers swimming to shore, both become infected with the Shah as well. Taran Zhu then arrives and explains to them the nature of the Shah and demands that they refuse to bring their war to Pandaria. Taran Zhu reappears again in the Kunlai Summit after Sunwalker Dezko and Anduin Rin are trying to convince Zuin, the White Tiger, to allow the Horde and the Alliance into the Veil of the Eternal Blossoms. As Zuin puts their representative through various tests, Taran Zhu repeatedly warns Zuin not to allow the, quote, wanderers from beyond the mist to enter the Veil. He cites the Shah energies that repeatedly emerged from the representative, showing that they had not cleansed their negative emotions, as reasons for not allowing them into the Pandaran's most sacred veil. Despite this, and to Taran Zhu's final warning that he made a terrible mistake, Zuin allows both the Horde and the Alliance into the area. Following this, the Shado-Pan becomes stretched thin dealing with the Mogu, Yangol, Mantid, and Shah, and become concerned with the lack of reinforcement to battle zones they are involved in. Eventually, the heroes of the Horde and the Alliance are sent by Shado-Pan members to the monastery itself, and they discover that the Shah of Hatred had broken free and corrupted Taran Zhu himself. It can be appropriately assumed that the hatred Taran Zhu has for the Horde and the Alliance is what allowed the Shah to control him. The heroes help Taran Zhu cleanse the Shah of Hatred from himself, and his view towards them softens somewhat. Taran Zhu then chases the Shah of Hatred into the town-long steppes, which had escaped following the battle at the monastery. While hunting the Shah, Taran Zhu shores up various Shado-Pan camps with the help of the adventurers. He ultimately succeeds in destroying the Shah of Hatred, along with Shado-Pan warriors and the help of the adventurer themselves. After its defeat, he still expresses shame at his emotions getting the best of him and allowing the Shah to escape and corrupt him in the first place. Taran Zhu and the Shado-Pan appear again fighting against Lei Shen's forces on the Isle of Thunder. He is accompanied by 2 masters, Yalia and Nurong, as well as a slew of his elite troopers. While the Shado-Pan's main purpose is to stop the Thunder King, and as such they send adventurers to deal with his champions, Taran Zhu himself kept a close eye on Lorthamar Theron and Jaina Proudmoore, both of which were on the island and were out for the other's blood. As the fight against Lei Shen reaches its apex, Taran Zhu and the Shado-Pan sought to stop one of Lei Shen's underlings, named Shanbu, from resurrecting the Cloud Serpent Nalak the Stormlord back into the world. After Taran Zhu, the Shado-Pan, and the Adventurer fight through Shanbu's Mogu and the Zandalari, Taran Zhu and Shanbu begin dueling themselves, and the Mogu eventually takes advantage of a wearied Taran Zhu to grievously wound him. He is only saved by the actions of the Adventurer with him, but he has little time to recover. With Shanbu dead and most of Lei Shen's defenses outside of the Throne of Thunder now gone, Jaina and her Kirin Tor offensive, and Lorthamar and his Sunreaver onslaught very nearly come to blows. Taran Zhu, having reached his absolute limit with the Horde and the Alliance, explains to the 2 leaders that they can only end this cycle of war and violence if they turn around today and walk away. His words do convince Jaina and Lorthamar to leave, and then he is taken by Yalia back to the monastery for healing. Finally, during the escalation event, Garrosh Hellscream orders a Goblin Dig Squad to strip mine a large portion of the Veil of the Eternal Blossoms in order to find an artifact that Garrosh wants to use to fuel his war effort. Seeing this as literal sacrilege, Taran Zhu confronts the leader of the Horde's shrine in the Veil, the Tauren Sunwalker Dezko, and orders him and his Horde to leave. He even threatens to use lethal force with his Shado-Pan if they do not comply. Sunwalker Dezko tries to explain to him that Garrosh does not speak for the rest of the Horde, and that many are rising up against him. Dezko promises that the Horde will bring Hellscream to justice, and he asks him to give them time to make sure that happens. Because of the Horde's actions in fighting off the various threats of Pandaria, including Lei Shen's forces, Taran Zhu allows Dezko until the end of the season to make good on his promise. He cites his familiarity with dealing with tyrants as a reason why he is allowing this to happen. Now, I've covered all of Taran Zhu's characteristics in the history portion, so we're skipping right to the opinion portion. For those of you who haven't played 5.3, and if you haven't, I encourage you to do so. Even though I dislike the Alliance's story, it is story nonetheless. And for those of you who play the Horde, do even more so, because you'll understand what I'm talking about here. If you're a Horde player and you finish the 5.3 story, if you return to your shrine, you will see that scene between Sunwalker Dezko and Taran Zhu that I just described in the history. This event, to my surprise, sparked quite a bit of debate, not only on the MMO Champion forums, but between the But Wait There's Lore hosts and the forum goers as well. Their argument can be summed up in two main points, and before I get into that, I want to make a little aside here. I am being genuine when I request that people correct me if I'm misrepresenting their side, so this is what I see their argument boiling down to. 1. Taran Zhu's hatred of the Horde is irrational, and this is because the Horde, along with the Alliance, helped Taran Zhu and the Shado-Pan deal with the various threats on Pandaria that they themselves were unable to deal with. And 2. If Taran Zhu did decide to try and forcibly remove the Horde from the shrine, they would be unable to, and the shrine members would crush the Shado-Pan. If it wasn't obvious yet, I clearly disagree with this argument, so I'm going to take each point and explain why I personally believe it is either based on incomplete information or a misunderstanding of information. First, the first argument is Taran Zhu's hatred for the Horde is irrational, because the Horde helped deal with the issues the Shado-Pan were unable to. I actually believe the exact opposite is true. Taran Zhu's hatred of the Horde, and to a lesser extent the Alliance, are completely justified. Let's explore why though. You need to look at the situation from Taran Zhu's point of view. The Shah, while an ever-present and dangerous threat, were nowhere close to being as dangerous as they become when the Horde and the Alliance arrive. People seem to disagree with this premise as well. They claim that we only unleashed the Shah of Doubt, which is the one that appears during the Jade Forest cinematic, and not the other ones. People argue that the Shah of Fear must have been out and about before we arrived on Pandaria, because of how systemic the corruption of the Mantid was. However, I will simply quote from Dave Kosak, lead quest designer for Mists of Pandaria, on Twitter. A question was directed to him saying, quote, "Did the Alliance and Horde cause the Shah of Fear to be released, or was it already corrupting the Empress of the Mantid before our arrival?" Dave Kosak responded with, I quote, "Fear, doubt, etc. began boiling up as soon as the Alliance and Horde arrived. Check out Gatrul and Doran's journals in-game." For those curious, I will also link this tweet below to verify my claim. It was tweeted on May 31st. So now we've established that all of the major Shah did not emerge until the Horde and the Alliance arrived on Pandaria. Now we have to think of the ramifications of this happening. We know that the Shah of Fear corrupts the Mantid Queen, and causes her to swarm the Mantid 10 years before it usually does. This has an immense ripple effect. The Mantid's premature swarming causes the Yangol to try and escape Townlong Steppes, which puts them in direct competition with the Shado-Pan in Kunlai Summit. During this chaos, the Mogu also use this opportunity to attack and try to retake some Pandaren villages that they once owned many years ago. So, we can realistically pin the Mogu, the Yangol, the Mantid, and the Shah on the Horde and the Alliance, only for causing the Shah to emerge. Now, the Shado-Pan have been trained to deal with each and every one of these threats, but they have never dealt with all four at once. Never, not once in their 10,000 years of existence. After all of this, in my opinion, it's honestly totally realistic to see why Taran Zhu views the Horde and the Alliance with such contempt that he does. but eventually he is overwhelmed by his hatred and is corrupted by the Shah of Hatred himself. And despite the fact that it is because of the Alliance and Horde that the Shah became free to corrupt him, he even begins to soften towards them after they help cleanse the corruption from him. He shows his remorse in his own failings, and doesn't even try to pin the blame on either of them. And just like happened with Jaina Proudmoore in 5.1, the Horde betray Taran Zhu and the Shado-Pan again in 5.3. Now, here we come to another point of contention. There are those that argue that Garrosh is acting in a way that's not the will of the Horde, and thus Taran Zhu cannot blame the Horde for Garrosh's actions. I would normally agree with this line of thought, but you have to look at the events of 5.3 canonically. The events of the Dark Heart of Pandaria scenario, in which the Horde does excavate the Veil, takes place before any portion of the Rebellion storyline from either side. In fact, Lore Walker Cho even tells us that we're witnessing an event that happened in the past. Even if it is the recent past, it still is the past. Vol'jin had not yet returned to spark the rebellion, and the Bilgewater Goblins had not even left the Horde when this occurs, because it's not until the end of the scenario that we are implied that the Goblins are now leaving the Horde. I also feel like I should point out that this whole matter about Garrosh not representing the Horde in regards to the excavation in the Veil would only matter if the act of desecration in that Veil had any motivation to begin the rebellion. It didn't, and there isn't any lore supporting this claim. It's only used by Sunwalker Desco as an excuse after the fact. Finally, to put a pin in countering this argument, Taran Zhu has no care or knowledge of the inner politics of the Horde. Even if we claim that the events of the Dark Heart of Pandaria scenario storyline falls on Garrosh alone, he is still the leader of the Horde in Taran Zhu's eyes. Now, let's finish up by countering the second argument of the Shado-Pan, which is being unable to forcibly clear the Horde's shrine. Those who make this argument act like the Horde's shrine is some impregnable fortress. This is far from the truth. The only people of real significant power in the shrine are the players themselves, who are not canonically as powerful as they are in-game, especially when you consider that level 90 players can fairly easily solo Illidan in Black Temple on their own. It's the simple mechanics versus lore argument. To further augment my counter-argument, we can take a look at several descriptions of the shrine from the Sunwalker Desco short story called Bleeding Sun. Here, the shrine is described as the first, quote, "Dozens of refugees from war-torn lands north of the region streamed into the shrine morning and night in search of food, shelter, and respite from the strife," unquote. And now the second, quote, "Merchants groaned as they set up rickety stands. Refugees huddled together and shared food," unquote. And finally, the third, which undoubtedly proves my counter-argument, quote, "The shrine wasn't an impregnable fortress," unquote. The shrine is a place where Horde refugees arrive, and they are basically simply trying to live their lives together. There is nothing suggesting that it's some awesome war fortress that can hold off dozens of assaults. And next, we have to look at the Shado-Pan themselves as a group. This is an organization of Pandaria's finest warriors, proficient in both battle through the Blackguards and stealth and assassination through the Wukao. The fact is, by the time 5.3 comes out, most of Pandaria's major threats are dealt with. The Yangol, the Mantid, the Mogu, and the Shah are pretty much all gone, except for the Shah of Pride, who hasn't appeared yet. The full force of the Shado-Pan, which is the group that kept the Shah and the Mantid at bay separately for 10,000 years, would then be fully committed to fighting the Horde. With the Horde already fracturing from rebellion within, personally, I don't think the Horde of the Shrine would stand a chance against the Shado-Pan. Finally, can I just mention how badass Taran Zhu is throughout this whole expansion? Will you allow me to fanboy just for a moment? This expansion has such fantastic characterizations for multiple characters, especially for an MMORPG. Taran Zhu's mentality makes perfect sense to me, and he still tries to eventually see the Alliance and Horde as allies after they help him cleanse himself of the Shah of Hatred. He isn't afraid to admit that he is wrong. In many ways, Taran Zhu could teach Garrosh a lot about how to be a leader. Even though it would be slightly out of character, I would be willing to deal with that if I could see Taran Zhu and the Shado-Pan interact with the Rebellion in the Siege of Orgrimmar in 5.4. They could even tie that into the Horde and the Alliance's Pandaren factions, both of which have been 100% completely ignored after their starting zone. And to end it, can I just say how awesome the event is when he tells both Jaina and Lorthamar to walk away? I got chills when I first saw that. It was fantastic. Taran Zhu's voice actor is just amazing. There, now how was that for a long opinion section? And that's it, everybody. My episode on Taran Zhu and the Shado-Pan. Thanks for listening. If you believe I've forgotten something here or my premise at any point is wrong, feel free to leave those in the comments below. I am most certainly willing to admit that I am wrong in an effort to get the unbiased truth regarding the lore. I have no problem doing that. If you like this video and want to help me out, the best way you could do so would be to like, favorite, comment, and subscribe. But if you truly wanted to help me out, you could do so by sharing my video with those you think might find them interesting. I am always looking to introduce more people to the lore, so please, if you know anybody like that, send them my way and I will be forever grateful. And, as always, finally, if you have any suggestions for characters you would like to see explored next, let me know and I will try to do my best to accommodate it. I know I've said this a few times now, but I really do take viewer suggestion into consideration. I was asked to do a video about Taran Zhu and the Shado-Pan, so here you go. Thanks again, everybody. My name, as always, is Necroxis, and I hope to see you for our next in-depth look at a Warcraft character and their lore. Because, as I say, there's always more Warcraft lore to explore, and I hope you do that with me. Farewell.